And good morning, good evening, wherever you are around the nation, around the world. And this is not George Norrie. Thank God. I'm Timothy Roxbury. I'm your host for Supernatural Realm right here on WTRMradio.com. This is the Supernatural Realm. And we got a very special guest. And forgot to mention, you can find all our on Spotify, TuneIn, Podbean, and our very own app available on Google Play. Just click WTR MFM on Google. Find us there. And you can also find us on our home website, WTRMradio.com. You can also find great merchandise from each of our shows. We got hats, cups, shirts, just about everything. Everything minor. We even got so we got a little bit of everything. Tonight we have Brandon Weston here with us. Brandon is a healer, spirit medium, a writer living in the Arkansas Ozarks. Ozark folk magic, plants, and healing. The author of Ozark Healing Traditions, a collection of lectures and workshops focusing on traditions of medicine, magic, and folklore from the Ozark Mountain region. As an active healer, he with clients, including everything from spirit cleanses to house blessings, all of the weird and wonderful ailments. He comes from a long line of Ozark hill folk and works hard to keep the traditions that he'd collected alive and true for nations, for generations to come. Brandon, it's so wonderful to have you here. We had a great laugh here before the show started. It's I got a feeling this is going to be a wonderful show. Great to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So how did you start? Did you grow up as a healer? Did you grow up psychic? Did you grow up having being different than other people your age?
Yeah, so I grew up in an Ozark family, and part of Ozark identity, I guess, is that there's a lot of weird things we believe in and accept, but nobody ever talks about any of it. So it's one of those things. I grew up around weird family stories, traditions, folk remedies, things like that, and I didn't really think anything of it because nobody talked about it. Nobody made a big deal about it. So I just thought it was what everybody experienced growing up. And then when I started college, I started reading works from other Ozark folklorists and figured out that it's not what everybody experiences, that it's a part of this culture. It's a part of this thing called the Ozarks. And I never really realized that was around. I just thought it was my weird family.
Mm-hmm. Is there a lot of when you say Ozarks? Is that a lot of Native American history in Arkansas?
Yeah, so the Ozarks, the southern Ozarks, Boston Mountain region is in sort of northwestern Arkansas, but the Ozark Mountain area, it actually extends up into Missouri, almost to St. Louis as well. Mm-hmm. And then kind of over into Kansas a little bit, and then down into Oklahoma. So it's a really big region. Sort of defined by these mountains and lots of rivers and caves and things like that. And if you look at the landscape around the Ozarks, everything's very flat. Everything's, just towards the south, we have Louisiana with swamps and all of that stuff. So it kind of is a weird region that sort of stands out in the middle of the country. We're not quite southern. We're not quite Midwestern. We're closer to Appalachian culture. So originally it was, there's been quite a few indigenous groups that have come through the area. So originally, there was a group that people have called the Bluff Dwellers. Historians are kind of debating who they were, but they've left behind, a lot of physical artifacts and things like that. After that, it seems the Caddo were in the area for quite a while. And then in around 1500, late 1400s, early 1500s, the Osage came from the Ohio River Valley and moved into the Ozarks. So they were kind of our most recent indigenous group in the area. There was also Cherokee in the area, but they were called the Old Settler Cherokee that were given land around the turn of the 19th century, so 1800s, early 1800s, before the Indian Removal Act. So there was some Cherokee presence here, but pretty much as soon as indigenous people were starting to be removed to Oklahoma, the Osage were completely removed. The old settler Cherokee were completely removed. And that opened up the land for mostly white settlers, but also mixed race settlers from Appalachia to cross over and settle in the Ozarks. So a lot of our Ozark folk practices, we do have some indigenous influence, especially with the plants that we use. But that influence wouldn't have actually come from the Ozarks. It would have come from Appalachia, when the Ozark people were still kind of in that Appalachian motherland sort of, and interacting with the indigenous groups in the Southeast. So it's actually, a part of my research has been sort of seeing if there are connections to the Osage, to the Caddo, things like that. But sadly, there aren't that many. We have more connections to the Muskogee Creek and Cherokee than we do to the Osage.
So the folk magic that you do is tied to the some of the Native American traditions, correct?
So not really. Ozark folk magic, it's kind of a complicated subject because Ozark folk traditions were kind of a melting pot of a lot of different things. So yes, we do have some indigenous traditions. Most of it comes from our plant knowledge. So there's a lot of plant remedies and things like that white settlers wouldn't have had coming from Europe. They would have encountered brand new plants and things like that. So there's a lot of traditions surrounding plants and certain aspects that are that can be connected to indigenous traditions. But most of what makes up Ozark folk magic, healing traditions, things like that is European. And so that in and of itself is kind of a melting pot too, because you have lots of influences from the British Isles, but then you also have French influence, you have German influence, you have Scandinavian influence. So there's all of these European traditions that sort of came to the New World and settled in the Appalachian region, mixed with indigenous practices, but also African practices from the slaves. And it just sort of all mixed together. And then that came over to the Ozarks and evolved and mixed with more stuff. And so for me as a researcher and practitioner, it's interesting to kind of look at the fingerprints. So see the different cultures and how they've affected the practices and everything. But it's really hard to separate out those practices. So I always tell people, it's Ozark folk tradition. You can find pieces from European traditions, but you can't call it, German folk magic any more than you could call it Cherokee folk magic or whatever. So these things have been influences upon the culture, but it's uniquely Ozark.
So it's a little bit of everything. It's a little bit of all traditions, kind of wrapped into one.
Yeah, and it's sort of all connected by this hill folk identity, which is has its own sort of pros and cons. It's based in this idea of the importance of the family. The Ozark people, when they came over from the Appalachians, they would have been small family groups, clans, sometimes communities, but not very often. So the practices that they had would have been kept in family lines, passed down by word of mouth, because most people couldn't read at that time. And so there's this sort of identity that has been, stereotyped as the hillbilly sort of identity. And so for quite a while, it's interesting because we get all these stereotypes. We get the terrible Midwestern stereotypes, we get the terrible Southern stereotypes, and we get the terrible hillbilly stereotypes. Okay. So we get all of these stereotypes sort of lumped on us. But there's a lot more to the culture than that, and it goes a lot deeper. And so growing up in that, I got to see a lot more of the culture than a lot of other people have, and certainly since then. going out and collecting remedies and all sorts of stuff from practitioners and old timers and all this other stuff. I've been able to really see the culture in a very different light, which for me that was a very important moment for me to have as an Ozarker, was being able to validate myself as an Ozarker, being able to say proudly that I'm an Ozarker, instead of trying to escape the stereotypes and all that.
So you've always felt that you were an Ozarker, so to speak, right? And then you just kind of did research and learned more about it and became a practitioner.
Yeah, I started off mostly as on the research side. So I started off, I read what the folklorist had to say about the Ozarks, and learned that, nothing has really been published about Ozark folk magic and healing traditions since the 40s. And so I wanted to update the story. I wanted to find out where these practices were today. So I went out on my own, and with the intention of just being a folklorist, being a collector, preserving traditions and things like that. And then after about a year of doing that, I started working pretty intensely with a healer that I had met, an older woman, who had a lot of information, a lot of different practices and things like that. And she, we were sitting down talking, and I was kind of describing my work and everything. And she just stopped me and she said, you're a part of this story too. Mm-hmm. And so from there, my entire framework changed. I was looking from the outside, but I'm a part of this culture. So why wouldn't I write from my own perspective? So I kind of changed my research a little bit. And in working with her, she also identified me as having the gift, which is, this idea in the Ozarks, healers they have this inborn power, or this inborn sort of connection to the magic on the land. And it's called the gift a lot of times. It goes by a lot of other names, but that's the most common one. And so she was able to identify that within me, which I didn't, at the time, I didn't really know what to do with that. But in working with her and working with other healers, I just sort of started figuring out what that connection to magic meant for me. And my practice just sort of developed from then.
Yeah, I just learned 19 years that I was an empath. I'm like, you mean all the strangeness that I feel and all this energy, all these things that I feel is actually a name for it? I'm like, holy crap! I had to learn more. I did a lot of the research. I talked to other psychics and intuitives, and I'm like, holy crap! I was blown away.
Yeah, it's a magical moment too. Like, there's so much that we live with, and until somebody says, identifies it for us, we kind of, after this lady said, you have the gift, then I started remembering experiences from my childhood that sort of maybe connected to that. I spent a lot of my time out in the woods because we lived out in the woods. So every summer I'd be outside playing in amongst the trees and down in the creek and at the lake and all this other stuff. And I would have conversations with the trees. I would sense spirits around. We have our own sort of Ozark fairies called the Little People. And I would have, conversations with them. And, these are things that I kind of, I guess, had forgotten, or just sort of, they were integrated into that sort of, this is just normal life stuff. But it took somebody saying, no, these are important experiences, and they point to something bigger. So only after that, I really kind of started thinking about it.
Yeah. Is it true? Is there like cryptid creatures in the Ozarks? Like strange go on?
Yeah. So we have a lot of sort of cryptids as a part of the folklore. I don't know how many people have seen them in a very long time, but one of the famous ones is the Gowrow, which is a giant sort of almost dinosaur-like thing. It's a giant lizard People describe it in different ways, but people will say it's as big as an elephant and it has tusks and it lives in caves. So it's one of these subterranean animals. So that's a pretty famous one. But we have some other ones. One of my favorites is the booger, which is it's a shapeshifter. So whenever you're out and you see these solid black animals, and sometimes they're described as all black with black eyes, those are said to be boogers. And there's kind of a debate. The old stories, they say that boogers are witches in disguise. So witches can sort of shapeshift into these creatures. I've also heard other people that say, they're their own creature in and of themselves, but they have connection to the other world, they have connection to magic and things like that. But they can only be killed with a silver bullet. That's like first and foremost. But then they also have like a lot of other sort of magical associations and things like that. So yeah, we have quite a few.
Yeah. You mentioned about fairies. Do you have you communicate with the fairies? You learn magic from them?
Yeah, so that's actually a part of my practice. I've learned a lot from connections with the land spirits. So the little people are kind of lumped in under land spirits, but there are other types of spirits also. And yeah, so traditionally that was seen as kind of a no-no area for people because it was too close to witchcraft. Originally amongst conservative Ozarkers up until the late 20th century or so, when you have all these other influences coming in. But it was a very conservative culture, and if you were a healer, if you didn't derive your power from God or the church, everything outside of that was witchcraft. It was suspect. And of course, as I collected stories and did more research, I kind of started to understand that people have always worked with land spirits. They've always worked with the little people. They just didn't talk about it because talking about it was where they got into trouble. So, there are healers still today, old timers that, have made bargains or deals with the little people in order to gain some power. It's a very dangerous road to go down. I've met people I met a guy who lost an eye. He believed it was, he gained some healing power, but the little people took one of his eyes, things like that. I haven't entered into any of those sorts of bargains. I work in a little bit different way, but yeah, the spirits of the land and working with those spirits, that's a big part of my work. And a really deep part of Ozark folk magic and healing in general is this connection to the land and this connection to sort of the neutral magic of the natural world. And so even if you're not directly working with the entities that dwell in that space, just by being on the land, being around sacred sites like waterfalls, natural springs, things like that, healers can derive a lot of energy and a lot of power just from being in those spots. And so that's kind of, I have these sort of yearly rituals. I make sure to go out and be on the land as much as I can. And, if I need to harvest plants, I try to do that and go out and do that instead of buying them, things like that, because I get a lot of energy and a lot of power from that exchange with nature.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a lot like being out. I guess, being a Wiccan and being out with the elements. It's kind of similar to that.
Yeah, I mean, you could consider it sort of a nature-based path. It's interesting to look at. I mean, it is so close to nature because it has its origins amongst people who had to live in nature. So that nearness to nature made them much more likely to protect nature, because if your whole survival depends upon your surroundings being in balance, you're going to develop a bunch of practices to respect the natural world. And so it's still an important part of the sort of folk culture around here, even though it's quickly becoming urbanized, but it's still at the heart of that sort of Ozark identity is connection to nature.
Mm. My mom and I make a garden every year, and I told her this year, I'm not doing it because we had a bad, uh, bad tomato crop last year, and I'm not doing it no more. That's it. And the moment I say that, comes home with 5 tomatoes and cucumber seeds. I'm like, oh, I told you I wasn't doing this. But as soon as I got in there, got my hands dirty, I began to connect with it again. So it's a joy to do. It's disappointing sometimes when you don't get the product out of plans that you put so much work into.
No, I get that. I much more enjoy foraging for stuff, going out in the woods, things like that. I'm a terrible gardener, but I can grow herbs, culinary herbs, and things like that. And those are very rewarding for me because it seems like you always get something out of them, even though, so those you can grow some basil and make some pesto and, while your tomatoes are dying or whatever.
Plant some dill. It comes up every 10 years for even if you don't get cucumbers, you got the dill. So
you still got the dill.
How have you been dealing with this retrograde? I mean, as a healer and as a practitioner, how have you been balancing it all?
Yeah, so over the past year, I've started doing more things remotely. So rather than having in-person clients come to my house, I do phone sessions, or I started doing Zoom sessions, things like that. And so every time retrograde comes around, I try not to book a bunch of people because, and I tell people, this is an important session, but we've got to schedule a few just in case. And I've of course had some times where Zoom would just not work at all, or my phone wouldn't work, or something like that. So for me, it's I guess as a practitioner, I use it as a time to sort of clear out my calendar a little bit and to sort of take it easy and focus on some of the retrograde lessons, which a lot of those have to do with slowing down, pulling away from technology, pulling away from, all of that sort of stuff that spreads us out, and, focusing a little bit more inward. So, yeah, I try to do that, but I still get really frustrated when things go wrong.
Yeah, I've had back the last couple of weeks because I've been, my blood pressure medicine has been off. I've been having side effects, and things have not been pretty the last few weeks. So I had to step back for a while and just kind of take a break, let nature take care of itself. So it's so far, today's the first day I'm starting to feel better. So
good. Yeah, I think we're starting to come out of it, maybe. So
yeah, we got 3 more days of it. So
3 more days. Well, hopefully those days are smooth, but I think we're through the worst of it probably at this point. But it's interesting how nature sort of provides these times during the year where we can take time to maybe slow down, things like that. I tend to hibernate in the winter. And then in the dead of summer, because here it gets really hot in the summer. So I tend to just sort of hibernate a little bit and kind of get back to that flow, that seasonal flow. And, a lot of the old timers I met, they knew about this stuff. They knew that, you stop working outside at certain times during the year. There's certain things you do in the winter. There's certain things you do in the springtime to sort of keep your body in tune with that sort of seasonal cycle. So I think that's one of the things that I write about in the book, is kind of getting back to that seasonal pattern as a way of helping us not just connect to the land, but also heal and, get right with everything.
I know Wicca has their holiday traditions, and Christianity has their holiday traditions. Are yours similar, or what's different about yours? Such as Easter, Christmas, that sort of basic.
Yeah, so we kind of incorporated all of our holidays in from Protestant Christianity. There's
Cool.
kind of there's a lot of different sort of feelings about that. I've met people who didn't celebrate any holidays because they really had this sort of simplified view of religion where, the holidays just sort of got in the way of everything. But generally speaking, we celebrate Christmas, things like that. We do have an interesting Ozark holiday. They celebrate it sort of in Appalachia too. We call it Old Christmas. It falls on January 6th. So, back in the 1800s, when they switched from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, which is what we use today, when they did that switch across Europe, there were all of these isolated communities, mostly in the United States, that didn't get the message. And so they kept using the old calendar. And so at some point in the Ozarks, they got the new Gregorian calendar, which changed the date of Christmas. So now we have Christmas Eve and Christmas, 24th, 25th of December. But then on January 6th, we have Old Christmas. And there are still a lot of families that sort of celebrate that as another Christmas time, or they might have another family gathering, things like that. But the Ozarkers, because we're so connected to the land, old timers, so these older communities, a lot of them have seasonal based holidays as well. So they'll have harvest festivals. Halloween is kind of a big thing in some areas, but more as like the ancient form of Halloween, sort of bonfires and things like that. They may celebrate wintertime, springtime, things like that. These were all holidays that agricultural people, farmers, would have, celebrated. They would have celebrated the equinoxes and solstices as sort of markings throughout the year to tell them what they needed to plant or what they needed to harvest, things like that. So we have a lot of those sort of agricultural holidays as well. But generally, there's, apart from Old Christmas, there's nothing that we have that, would seem odd to anybody. There are a lot of modern Ozark practitioners that are a part of, traditional witchcraft traditions or Wicca or, these other sort of, I've met Rosicrucians, I've met, all of these other sorts of groups. So as those different influences have come into the Ozarks, they've been mixed with a lot of Ozark traditional beliefs and things like that. So I've met, little communities of people that celebrate the Wiccan holidays or, the Wheel of the Year. I've met people that celebrate the Norse holidays, things like that. And kind of where I live is a little bit more urbanized, I guess. It's a little bit bigger town, city. And so there's all sorts of people that celebrate things here. But traditionally in the Ozarks, it's kind of based around, the Christian calendar.
That's awesome. Do you think there's a cure for cancer in your practice? and other things that are
Yeah, I think that, I've met quite a few people that have claimed to have cures for cancer and other big ailments. And,
right.
they've explained to me some of the methods, although most of them are very secretive about these methods. For me, I can't stop being a little bit of a skeptic. So I like to say that I'm very hopeful. I'm hopeful that, there is somebody that has a cure that's been curing cancer in one of these rural communities for years and years. And I hope that is there. And I hope, they pass that on and it continues. Or I'm hopeful that somebody, I know a lot about plants, but I'm not a scientist. I'm not a botanist. So I really hope there's a botanist one day that finds a plant in the Ozarks that, will do amazing things, because we have a lot of very weird plants here. And that's an area of research that's pretty exciting. So I like to say that I'm hopeful, but I don't know. I don't have any cures like that. My practice, for a while, I was sort of leaning towards the herbal practice. But I kind of figured out that that's not quite my area. So I still work with plants, but I work with plants mostly in a magical way with ritual and amulets and things like that. But most of my work is just sitting down and helping people find a solution to their problems. So whether that is, creating a ritual with them, or, incorporating in a traditional Ozark prayer or charm or something for their problem. I kind of work in this, what I call the old way, because, the old timers, they had to, at a drop of a hat, address any problem in the community that came up. And so for me, a lot of my work, I don't have a list of things I do. I just say, let's just sit down and talk about it. So I call them magical consultations, because that's kind of what they are. So if you have a problem, I'll listen to your problem and we'll figure out, a solution for it. But I kind of see myself as fitting in sort of the other part of the healing process. So traditionally, Ozarkers, they didn't make a distinction between healing the body and healing the mind or the spirit. And I think today we've kind of gotten away from that balance. And so I always encourage people to first, if you see a doctor, see a therapist, and then if you want to come to me to do additional work, then great. So I see myself as sort of helping to provide that other side of the healing process that really hasn't been represented for a while.
So I guess it would be safe to say that meditation is important then in healing.
An older lady in the Ozarks who, she was a healer, but her practice, all she did was people would come to her with their prescription medications and she would pray over them. And so the idea being that she was offering that sort of spiritual connection, that magical connection, to the scientific part, to the modern medicine part. And people swore by it. They said that, after taking this medicine, they didn't have to take it for as long. They didn't have, or it was more effective, things like that.
Right.
So she was offering this sort of other part of the healing process. And I think that we can do that for ourselves as well. So, I always encourage people. I'm a big proponent, you don't have to call it meditation, but, I always encourage people to take some time out of their day to just sit in silence. You don't even have to have your eyes closed, just sitting and just kind of being. And I always recommend that, especially if you're sick, because engaging with your own body systems is a part of that healing process. So not trying to separate yourself from it, but really engaging with what your body's doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My mom always seemed to want to go to the park. She's been bothering me the last couple of days. I want to just go to the park and sit and quiet. I think we should do that. Maybe we'll start to feel a little better. Because we've been dealing with chaotic neighbors around, so it's been affecting us a little bit. So.
Yeah, sometimes it's just good to separate yourself a little bit, to get away from that and just kind of get back to nature and get some sunshine and all of that.
Yeah. So what your practice and your thoughts on gemstones? Is there any specific gemstone that you use that you go to for different spells or rituals?
So I don't work a lot with crystals, but I will say that for me, the sort of the power that comes from magic is all about intention. And so I do feel like certain crystals help focus certain intentions just because of their makeup or their color, but also how you engage with those. So, I've met Ozark healers who do work with crystals, but they tend to work with, not the variety that a lot of people work with today. But I met one healer who really liked working with quartz crystal, which kind of, if you talk to people, quartz is a very neutral sort of crystal. A lot of people don't work with it because they don't see it as being very powerful. But for this guy, he worked with these quartz crystals that he mined out of his own backyard, and he did some very powerful work with that. But I think part of the power of it was his connection to the crystals itself. So he was using them almost as like a focus, or like as something to filter his intention. And I think at that point, any crystal or any object can really be that focus, that focal point of intention. So I have quartz that I work with, some quartz that he gave me, also some quartz that I kind of inherited to the family, that I keep around, and I use it occasionally in my work as a way of sort of being able to focus intention, things like that.
Yeah, how does your or manifest your day-to-day life? The Ozark tradition, how does it affect day-to-day life?
So for me, it's just, I take clients. So as a healer, my day-to-day life is I have my work, my hourly job that I work, but then I also have this other work. And so it always sort of incorporates into, what I do during the day. Ozarkers are really connected to certain cycles. So the moon cycles, the zodiac cycles, things like that. So I'm always thinking about what's coming up. So whether it's going to be the waxing moon or the waning moon, because certain work is done during those time periods. I'm always thinking about what zodiac moon signs are coming up, because certain work has to be done during those times. So I have a very a very filled in calendar and an almanac and all this other stuff that I sort of work with on a daily basis. But then it's also just, maintaining that spiritual connection to the land. I try to get outside as much as I can, even if it's just, walking across the yard, and sort of having that relationship with the land. And then also, maintaining my relationship with my spirit guides, my ancestors, things like that, that sort of pop in daily, usually. There's a big, area in Ozark folklore, but specifically folk magic traditions, is looking for signs, or we call them tokens. And so specifically when I'm working with a client, I am always, looking for signs, because these signs can point to, needing to do something else in the work. Maybe the work isn't as effective, or, maybe you need to go in a different direction or watch out for something. So that's kind of a part of daily life too, is just not necessarily being hyper paranoid about everything, but I think just having this sort of openness to the world around you, so that you aren't focused on the wrong things. You're kind of keeping yourself open to whatever signs may come along. So for me, that might manifest as, a certain person comes to mind that I need to talk to, or somebody might come up to me that I haven't seen in forever, and that might be a sign for me that, we need to do some work or something like that. So that's kind of a big part of my life, is just sort of being open to that flow of energy, that natural energy.
Yeah, what does your family members, what do they think about the work that you do?
I'm pretty lucky. My parents actually really enjoy it. So growing up, they were pretty conservative, and I have an older brother, and we were always questioning things. And when we got to college, we were exploring different things and areas and all this other stuff. And we kind of, I guess I like to say, we dragged them along with us. And so they're very different today than they were when I was growing up. So I've been very lucky for that. They love the book. They always try to catch my interviews and things like that all the time. So they really enjoy talking about it. And a lot of the enjoyment they get out of it is being able to reconnect to their own culture as well. So my parents and my grandparents, they're kind of this lost generation,
Right.
because they grew up wanting to escape that. Everything you did in your life was to escape the hills, to get out of there. And a lot of the traditions that my great grandparents would have had died out, or went underground, or people forgot about them, things like that. And so that was one of the big intentions with the book, is helping people reconnect to their past. And so through this book, I've had family members contact me and say, thank you for mentioning all of this stuff about the family. Did you also know that, and then they would tell me all of these other stories. And, people have been sort of remembering things from their childhood and then sharing them with me. So that's been a really good feeling, seeing my family sort of reconnect to their own culture, their own heritage. And I'm always happy to facilitate that.
Yeah. So you're bringing the tradition back into it then, right? Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, Ozark traditions in general, and not just magic and healing, but traditional food, traditional house building. We have all these traditions that are very specific to the Ozarks. They've been slowly dying out over the past 100 years, and it's rapidly increasing now that there's internet in most areas, and people, their kids and grandkids are no longer interested in this stuff, things like that. But what I have noticed is people in my generation, so I'm a millennial, and then people that are younger than me, they are interested. So I think we're at a good time for folk cultures, because there's this revival. There's this importance put on heritage, on culture, people wanting to get in touch with their roots, things like that. And this stuff is kind of cyclical, but I think we're at a good time right now where people are starting to get interested in it. So a lot of the people that contact me about the book are around my age and grew up in the Ozarks and never knew this was around. Their parents didn't talk about it. Their grandparents didn't talk about it. So, we're a lot of us are in the same boat. And so for me, it really is revitalizing a culture. It's really, it's bringing, trying to resuscitate the culture as best as I can. Because, every day we're losing storytellers. We're losing traditions.
Yeah.
And so if I can help prevent that, I want to do that. So,
yeah. As a millennial, you have a pretty important role to play, don't you? Very important role to play.
It's I find myself as the bridge a lot of times between the sort of the older cultures and the younger culture, and I'm happy to do that. But there are areas where I'm not very technologically inclined, actually, as a millennial. But I always I know how to find people. So I've met people that are really good at, scanning documents or archiving recordings and things like that. And so that I find myself being an encourager more than anything, just to get people to be excited about doing the work and collecting, remedies or whatever it is, being excited to engage with their culture and their family again and stuff like that. So,
we probably talked about, but are there similarities to Ozark folk magic and mainstream religion today? Is there any similarities there that you want to talk about?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. So generally speaking, there's a separation between what I call traditional Ozark culture and modern Ozark culture. Around the 60s, 70s, we had the Back to the Land movement around here, where people from mostly California and other places along the West Coast, some East Coast people, really flocked to the Ozarks because land was cheap, and they viewed it as this sort of wilderness that they could build communes and all of this other stuff. So there was really a sort of huge culture clash around that time with traditional culture. Before the 60s and 70s, you know, in the urban areas, there was a lot more exposure to other religions, even other spiritualities. Where I lived, there was a pretty prominent spiritualist group that was pretty early on here. But in the rural areas, it was still very connected to Protestant Christianity and those sort of more conservative values. Today, even in rural areas, you have people that, like I said earlier, consider themselves Wiccan. They are reclaiming the word witch for themselves. They are, working with, these sort of ancient deities, or working with animistic traditions, things like that. And so it's really interesting to see how the rural areas have changed. But generally speaking, the rural areas are still very conservative. But, sort of mixed in these areas, you find these pockets of just sort of the best culture, the weird stuff. It's a mix of the traditional and the new stuff and all of that. But even though there's this sort of conservative culture that's been here for a long time, there's all of these sort of fringe beliefs that people have had. So even though people were churchgoers, things like that, they went to healers as well. They believed in magic, even though they might not have used the word magic about it, or they believed in the little people. And so, there's all these sort of beliefs underneath that, even though on the surface, it's still this sort of conservative culture. And you still see that today. I've met, people, farmers who leave, solitary trees alone in their fields because they believe that the little people live there, or people that protect natural springs, or people that have seen aliens, or people that have seen Bigfoot. All of these sort of beliefs, they intermingle with that traditional culture. It's just, I think now it's the difference is, 70 plus years ago, you might have had some of these fringe beliefs, but there was no support for that. There was no way for you to actually share those beliefs with anyone. Now, even in the rural areas, people have the internet. So even if you are a part of that conservative culture, you still connect with other weirdos online and feel validated and all of that.
That's why we're here.
And I love that stuff. And, I get contacted a lot by people like that who are in isolated conservative areas, but they want to connect to this different part of their culture. And so that's, I have a lot of opinions about the internet, but that is one of the areas that I really see the internet being very beneficial, is in helping people connect and build those communities, even though, they may not be physical communities.
Yeah. That's why, Brandon, that's why I do this show, to connect with like-minded people, to get the word out. Maybe there's something that maybe they're interested in, never heard of before. Maybe maybe something that they'll hear may open their mind up. Maybe who knows? Maybe they'll get a healing message out of something. You just never know what kind of message people will get, or something they need to hear. That's why I do this.
Yeah, and it's good work. Like, amongst me and my friends, we aren't really a part of any churches and things like that. We kind of have our own spiritualities and stuff, but we always say, we're doing the Lord's work and helping revitalize culture, and getting, doing events where we talk about weird stuff, so that there may be somebody there that needs to hear it. And when I finished the book and got to hold it and got to look through it, the feeling that I had was that I was writing this book. I was writing the book that my childhood self would have wanted to read. And
Awesome.
And when I was a kid, there was nothing like this around.
Mhm.
And I would have devoured this book as a kid. And so I kind of take that same intention with, I do classes and workshops online as well. And I kind of take that same intention where, I'm wanting to teach the things, I'm wanting to write the things for those other kids, for those other adults, that are really looking for something. Yeah, they're really searching for that, and they haven't found it. So, yeah, I've met a lot of people that have really, that's what they've gotten out of the book, and that makes me extremely happy, because that was one of my major intentions with it, was helping people connect to that.
Awesome. Brandon, we're going to go on break here, and how give us listeners a book, and how can they get hold of it? Reach you if they need to.
Yeah, so the book is Ozark Folk Magic, Plants, Prayers, and Healing from Llewellyn Worldwide. And it's available pretty much anywhere online, as well as in select bookstores. I'm not sure really where it is physically. I think Barnes & Noble, Books A Million have it, but pretty much anywhere online. And then I have a website, ozarkhealing.com, as well as a Facebook page, Ozark Healing Traditions, and an Instagram at Ozark Healing Traditions.
Awesome. Llewellyn is a wonderful publisher. I get some great authors from them. They're wonderful people. You made a good choice.
I've really enjoyed working with them.
Yeah, you made a good choice. We're going to go on break here, Brandon, and we'll come back and continue. All right. You're listening to Supernatural Realm with Brandon Weston. We'll be right back right after this. Don't go away.
Paranormal or mystical experiences. There's some science behind it they're not looking at. Why do some people have negative encounters and others don't? What are the best methods to use? And is there some new truth to them? Well, we'll ask these questions on the hit radio show Supernatural Realm with Tim Roxbury, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, with your co-host Chip Reichenthal on occasion, on the Supernatural Realm, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern, on the Trim Radio Network, WTRMradio.com. The truth gets even better.
Take the blue pill. Take the red pill. Take the red pill. Take the blue pill. You take the red pill, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
That's right. Take the red pill, and I will show you how the rabbit hole goes every Saturday night from 9 to midnight here on the Trim Radio Network.
This is
it's the Red Pill Reality Show. See,
there is no turning back.
On the Spiritual Freedom Show on WTR Trim Radio Network, you will hear the voice of an extraterrestrial master speaking through teacher, Dr. George King, as it was recorded over 60 years ago. I'm Richard Lauren, and every Saturday at noon Eastern Time, I bring you the wisdom of the 9 freedoms, with practical ways to give global service and attain enlightenment.
You're listening to the Trim Radio Network. We cut the bull and serve the truth.
There are actually ways to live paranormal realms without all the fearful stuff, and we'll do that. Not just paranormal, but supernatural, psychic, metaphysical, even extraterrestrial realms. There's kindness and benevolence if you look hard enough, and we will. Join us every Monday from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern for Kindness Beyond the Veil with your host, Chip Reichenthal. We've got great guests, fascinating information, cool topics, and we'll even feel better. Laugh a little. We'll welcome you and ease your Join us Mondays from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. Kindness Beyond the Veil with your host, Chip Reichenthal. Here on Trim Radio Network, WTRMradio.com.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
WTRMradio.com, your talk station. And welcome back to Supernatural Realm on WCET FM with my special guest, Brandon Weston. It's been great the last hour, man. It's been flying by. How you doing?
Doing good, yeah. It's been a good conversation.
Yeah. Is there what else do you want to talk about? Is there anything other directions you want to go? Anything specific?
A big interest of mine is always in sort of the paranormal stuff, the weird stuff,
okay.
Which figures in pretty heavily in the Ozarks. Also part of our magic and healing traditions, stuff like that. So, like I was talking about earlier, there's this idea of this neutral magic in the world that manifests in different ways. Traditionally, the view was that the spirit world or the other world is constantly present. It's a sort of mirror world of our own. And there are certain places where that is thin. And, we inherited a lot of our beliefs from European traditions. So you can see that same sort of idea across different areas. But there's something about the Ozarks, and, I've felt it. And, I'm convinced that it's not just because I'm from here, but I've known other people that have come here and, they've had very strange experiences. They've, been out in the woods camping, or, we have a lot of waterways, so they've been rafting or canoeing and have had sort of weird feelings or experiences. And I think that there's something to that. I think that there's a reason why people were drawn to the mountains, whether it's, the indigenous people or, the white settlers that came later. There was something that really drew them here. And I think a lot of it is expressed in that sort of connection to the other world, connection to the spirit world. So there, traditionally there are a lot of beliefs around the dead, spirits of the dead. There are a lot of, old, taboos around the dead. There's also omens, things like, if you see certain butterflies, it's messengers from your dead relatives, things like that. So, the Ozarks, like we were kind of talking about before the break, there's this conservative shell that I think a lot of times people, they encounter that and it just repels them immediately. And I understand, as a person who's not a part of that conservative sort of culture, I get it. But then there's all this other really cool stuff sort of under the surface. And a lot of it has been hidden or kept secret over the past, 200 years. Our folk traditions, that even just the basic connection to the land, connection to the spirit world, things like that, people don't talk about this stuff a lot.
Right.
And it's out of this sort of respect for it more than anything. And, if you, by showing your respect to these practices, means not talking about them, not sharing them. There's a famous Ozark saying that we always lie to strangers. And so that is sort of a manifestation of that, where, it's not out of any malice or to be rude or anything unfriendly or anything like that. On the surface, you're going to get a very different image of Ozarkers than what's underneath all of that, because Ozarkers we're so fiercely protective of the culture, we're protective of the land. And I think a lot of it has to do with survival, but then I think there's this other side as well, that so much of our beliefs are very subtle. This connection to the other world, this connection to the spirit world, it's nothing mind blowing, even though it can be. It's no sort of booming voices in the forest or burning bushes, things like that. It's very subtle. And I think that, I met one very wise old timer who really described it in a good way. He said that, sometimes when you don't have words to describe something, the best thing to do is sit in silence.
Right.
The best thing to do is to not try to describe it, not try to talk about it, but just let it be and just kind of experience it. And that has been, talking to him, that was very helpful for me in sort of developing my own practice. Because now I don't try to explain ghosts or spirits or the little people or my connection to the other world, things like that, because for me it's much more important and meaningful to just experience that. Right. And helping others experience that as well, which is why I'm always very excited when outsiders come to the Ozarks and they have those weird mystical experiences, because then we have a point of reference to talk about. We can actually talk about the spirit world and things like that because you've experienced it. It's a very experiential culture. And so, I've a lot of weird experiences, a lot of ghost stories, things like that. I've been to a lot of haunted barns, and all sorts of weird things.
What is it? What is it with barns? Is it the barnstone? Is it the old energy? What is it? The land? Is it the history of the land? Or it's a combination of everything.
It's kind of a combination of everything, but I thought about this because a lot of people that I met that had ghost stories and things like that, they always brought up barns or milk houses, things like that. And I was kind of thinking about it, and the only thing that I could really think of is that the type of work that you would do in a barn is sometimes very dangerous. You always have the risk of, falling out of the hayloft or, getting, hit by a horse or like trampled or something like that. And so a lot of these haunted barns also had very tragic histories of people dying in the barns or around the barns, things like that. And so that's kind of the only thing I was able to really point to. But yeah, I've been to haunted sort of houses out in cabins and things like that. Even a couple haunted outhouses. But there tends to be a lot of barns.
Yeah, my sister and her ex-husband built their house like 20 years ago, and they used a lot of old barnstone. And there's just something about the house and the property that just weird me out. I get bad energy from it. It's unsettled, very unsettling. I got it. I can't stay there long.
Yeah,
It's creepy.
I'm a firm believer that material objects hold energy, and
right.
especially in areas that are highly trafficked. So things like houses and barns, they are sponges for that energy. And even though they may not themselves hold any sort of spirits or anything like that, they could just hold that energy too. So it could be that it's not even like a ghost or a spirit, but it's just the energy sort of letting off that has been absorbed for so long. So experience has told me that things like that don't always last forever. Give it maybe 20 more years or something. But these objects, they don't usually create that energy. They may give off the energy, but after a certain point, they'll give it all up, give it all away.
Yeah. We talked about what's your thoughts on omens such as dragonflies? If you get like dragonflies around you for no particular reason, could that be possibly a loved one coming to visit you?
Yeah, I believe that signs and omens and things like that can be ways for departed loved ones to communicate. I think that traditionally in the Ozarks we've had a lot of these, so specifically connected to the dead. So butterflies. There's also the belief about the dragonfly being connected to spirits of the dead. Also, redbirds, the cardinal. It's another token or omen. So there's a belief that if a cardinal is, out of nowhere just starts pecking at your window, it can be an omen that from a loved one that something bad's going to happen. Things like that. So I do think that these things are sort of surrounding us in day-to-day life. Traditionally, a lot of healers and practitioners would specifically look for these signs because they could point to people trying to interrupt the healing process when they were working with a client, or that they needed to go in a specific direction, things like that. So there are certain omens for evil or omens for sickness. So like a screech owl, for instance. So if a screech owl screams, which I don't know if you've ever heard a screech owl, but they're not like the hoot hoot owls. they have a very, very high pitched screeching noise. And so this was seen if owls in general, if they hooted during the healing process, it was kind of a sign that you maybe needed to do some protection work as well. But a screech owl specifically was one of these very bad omens. And in the Ozarks, there are countermeasures that have been developed amongst these rural families, things like that. You don't really see them very often, but it's basically there's an omen that pops up, and then you do a certain action to counter the effects of the omen. So, for instance, kind of culturally, we know this. So, the tradition of if you spill salt, you've got to toss it over your right shoulder or left shoulder, things like that. So in the Ozarks, one of those is, if you hear a screech owl, you throw salt into the fireplace. And that is sort of a countermeasure. They call it taking the cuss off the situation, or which is traced back to curse. So basically, there's other ones too. So if you're walking down the street and a white cat crosses your path behind you, you're supposed to take off your shirt and turn it inside out and put it back on as a way of countering the curse. So not all of our signs and omens are good. Some of them also point toward sort of bad things happening. I had a student once in one of my classes that asked a really interesting question. I had to think about it for a while. They asked whether so like in the case of the owl, whether it was the owl that was producing the evil effect, or if they were just a messenger of the evil. And I had to think about it because I had never really thought about it in that way before. But I talked to some other sort of people that know more about omens than me, some old timers, and the consensus seems to be that these are just sort of manifestations or warning signals of something that is happening. So in the case of dragonflies or the redbirds pecking at your window, it's not that the spirit of or the ghost of your loved one is inside of this animal, but that their presence, they sort of use the natural world to manifest these warning signals or these signs. And the same thing with the owl. The owl isn't, inherently evil. It's just the owl is in tune maybe with certain energies and gives off these warning signals as a way of warning us, because, you know, as part of like the mythos, I guess, the folklore, you know, humans, we're not as close to nature as the animals are. We're not as close to nature as the plants are. So we're dumb. We don't get all the signs. We, you know, the nature, they understand that flow of magic. They understand that flow of energy, and, you know, it's nature that's trying to help us out by giving us those signs and omens and warnings, things like that.
Yeah, I've had down our basement, we have like, you know, basement, you know, ordinary basement windows. And when I was younger, we would have robin windows and just die. And then a week later, one of my relatives would pass away. It happens. It used to happen every time growing up.
Yep.
I'll get a bird that drops dead.
Yeah. Yeah, and certain people are sensitive to that too. So
yeah,
it
was. Yeah,
it could be that warning or that signal was appearing to you instead of somebody else who might have ignored the sign or might not have, you know, looked at it in the same significant way. And so I do believe that signs come to us, you know, signs that are sort of catered to individual people. And I believe that people that have the gift, people that have that natural connection to magic, they receive maybe more of these signs because they have the eyes to see them or the ears to hear them. That's what I think too.
Yeah. What's that? I wanted to mention about, we had last summer? It was probably, I would say before last. And my cousin had died of cancer. And I'm not sure if it was I think it was just before he passed away, or shortly after that. We have a long, narrow porch out front. My mom does, and she had a pair of 3 doves, kind of swoop in one end and exit the other end, in pairs. And they hung out on a dogwood tree outside.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's a sign.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's a lot of signs come from birds, I've found. So like the cardinal in the Ozarks, the turtle dove is also a messenger of the other world, or just sort of doves in general. Yeah, a lot of the I guess message bringers are birds for whatever reason. There's also a lot from insects as well, so butterflies and dragonflies and things like that. Yeah, I think a lot. It's all very interesting and all open to sort of interpretation too, because different things obviously mean different things to different cultures and stuff like that. I think it's interesting to look at. And for me, from an Ozark perspective, it's interesting because there is this sort of idea of the neutral magic of the world around us and how that manifests in maybe a deeper way in animals and plants and things like that. And so I always take it as, you know, the animals and the plants are teachers. They're trying to teach us certain things. If we listen, we can learn a lot. But unfortunately, you know, we don't a lot of the times.
Yeah, I find that a lot, you know, within the paranormal, actually, especially doing investigations or sitting at a haunted location. Just when you just sit down in a quiet space and just put the recorder on and just hit record, you get so much more out of spirit talking than just asking it stupid questions. You know, they talk to you when they're ready, and they're just full of information.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting sort of aspect to bring out of that spirit relationship too, is that, you know, we're so busy talking that we don't get all of the information we need sometimes. And, just by sitting there, we can get so much more than by asking, the questions to the spirits and stuff like that. I think personally, so I do a lot of work with spirits as well. I am a spirit medium, but I always tell people that I kind of work in a very different way. I sense spirits and I can kind of get sort of flashes of memories from them and things like that. I don't do any sort of, contacting granny work or anything like that. I have very specific spirits that I work with, and, I have a much deeper connection to the spirits of the land, things like that. But there's this interesting, aspect of the spirit world that, really thrives in silence, or thrives in what I consider those sort of natural experiences. Sometimes talking can be almost unnatural. And when you instead connect more to silence, I think that spirit activity really heightens up. And so I've experienced that a number of times.
Have you experienced those are just seeing them?
What was the question? Sorry, I didn't get the question. What was it?
Have you had it? Yeah, have you had say you are and you this weird energy come? It's kind of negative energy. Have you had experience like that?
Oh yeah. Pretty much anytime I go out on the land, even in town, there are places that I get that sort of feeling, but there's so many other energies that, it clouds up the water, sort of, to use that metaphor. There's so many other energies. It's kind of hard to feel out in town. Yeah, but pretty much every time I go out to rural areas where there's not a lot of people, especially areas that, there may only be 100 people in the area, I always get these experiences. A lot of times I sense them as sort of almost like whirlpool vortex sort of experiences where, I'll be walking along and all of a sudden it'll feel like, air is moving all around me in a circle, or, these sort of energies are working. And in a lot of cases at those points, I also have sort of, am able to see spirits or hear them, or, generally that is an omen or a token that, there's some sort of spirit activity around. Oh, I think Mercury retrograde is getting us. I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh. Yeah, okay, I'll say.
I think Mercury retrograde is having fun with us right now. Yeah. So do I get messages from spirit when I am out in the Ozarks, in rural areas? Yeah. Yeah, I do. Definitely. For me, that is it's such a powerful experience being out on the land for me, because I feel like I have such a connection to that flow, that magical flow. Every time I'm out, I always get messages, and sometimes it's sort of what I would consider messages from nature itself, and then other times it's messages from very specific spirits or entities or ghosts, things like that. And sometimes it's very strange messages. So I was out one time in this very rural area off of a pretty secluded trail, and there was a nice creek there. And so I was spending some time by the creek, and I noticed that there was some sassafras trees up from the creek. And sassafras is one of our native plants. It's very medicinal. It used to be the flavoring in root beer, so it has this sort of root beer smell and flavor to it. But it has a lot of magical and medicinal uses in the Ozarks. So I kind of walked up because I noticed the trees there, and I got that feeling that there was something there. This was a power spot, or this sort of sacred place. And I just got this message. I don't know where it came from, but the sassafras trees wanted water from the creek. And I just came to mind. I don't know where it came from, but I've dealt with these messages so long that I just immediately responded. And I had an empty container. I had already drank my water, so I went and got creek water and poured it on each one of the trees, and it seemed to have satisfied them. And so sometimes the messages aren't grand messages from beyond or anything like that. Sometimes it's just spirits reaching out, wanting certain things. I have a deep connection with sassafras. It's one of my power plants. It's one of the plants that I work with a lot, and I usually always connect to those plants when I'm out. And for me, I think it was just this plant that I work with so much, wanting an exchange, wanting some water to drink, as maybe, as a way for me to maybe offer a little bit of thanks to the spirit of the plants that I work with so much. So yeah, that happens a lot, pretty much every time I'm out. But like I said, it also happens when I'm in town as well. It's just, there's all sorts of other energies that sort of get in the way. It's hard to connect to that sort of deep Ozark spirit that is in the land, because everything else sort of gets in the way a lot of the times, and can be kind of distracting. How do Ozarkers approach ghosts or spirits? Yeah, that's a very good question. Traditionally, we've kind of, even amongst the more conservative, people of the past, and even sort of conservative cultural areas today, surface level, there's this sort of idea that, you are born, you live, you die, you go to heaven or hell. But underneath that, there's so many more beliefs. Even amongst conservative people, they don't always, they a lot of times they believe there's sort of these middle ground, there's these middle areas, so that they can receive messages from their loved ones in the form of animals, or they can communicate to their loved ones as angels, things like that. I've met healers who, as a part of their work, their guiding spirits, or whatever you want to call them, were angels. And some of them were people who had passed in their own life. And for me, I use different terminology. I wouldn't call them angels. I would call them, ancestral spirits or, spirit guides, things like that. But at that point, it's just kind of semantics. But, there is kind of has always been this connection with the spirits in the other world. Regular people, traditionally, there was a lot of fear surrounding that. You didn't want to be haunted. You didn't want somebody to come back and hang around your house. So there was a lot of, as a part of folk magic, there's a lot of exorcisms and things like that. I think part of the change that has happened into the modern world is I see more and more people, and I work in this way myself, more and more people are exposed to different sorts of spiritualities and religions and things like that. And amongst the spirit mediums and the people that work with the other world a lot, amongst those practitioners today, I see more and more people working not to drive spirits out or to exorcise spirits, things like that, but to help transform spirits, to help spirits move on, to help spirits elevate, things like that. And that's really exciting because that really hasn't been a part of Ozark traditional culture, the more conservative culture. That sort of culture, if you had a problem with a ghost, you found the local person with a gift, and that person would come out and they would say the right prayers or perform a certain ritual and get rid of the ghost. And so it's exciting for me to see modern practitioners that are working in a little bit more altruistic way, I guess, in a little bit nicer way with ghosts. Because that was a learning experience for me. Because I used to be a part of the sort of, pray the ghosts away sort of thing. Right. But I had my own sort of spiritual experiences where, I would encounter ghosts that I was supposed to get rid of that would come through with a message that, they were there, they were making a ruckus because they had a problem or because they had, something going on or they were caught in a loop. And so really, I guess through experiencing the spirit world for me, I guess I slowly started to grow my compassion for the spirit world. And so now when people call me to their houses to work with spirits or whatever, I'm much more like, let's talk this through, what's wrong? What's going on? How can I help you, but still like in a healthy way to get you to maybe move on, but also better yourself. Right. And I think a lot of that for me has come from my connection to Spiritism. So the works of Kardec. For me, I read the Spirits book in high school, and it just sort of blew my mind. And then, from there, I kind of got interested in Buddhism and these other sort of altruistic spiritualities and paths and things like that. But I kept coming back to that sort of framework that Kardec laid down. And I still use that framework today, the spiritual hierarchy that he set out and all of this other stuff. So while Spiritism itself hasn't really been present in Ozark traditional culture, it's one of those things that I am bringing to the culture because I think the beliefs have been here. It's just they've gone by different names. They've had different definitions and things like that. So yeah, I have a series on my website of just little articles that I've written, but it's called The Ozark Spiritist. And I hope to continue working on it. I haven't written much for it, but it's just kind of a series of my perspectives as an Ozarker related to specifically Spiritism. Because I think it's one of those philosophies, those sort of modalities that works well with Ozark culture. And it teaches us to be kind and compassionate to ghosts, even the ones that are annoying. So.
Yeah. We need a lot of people. Are just so. I was talking to my Armstrong, my guy that used to. connect my internet. We became friends over the years, and he said people are just so angry today. This is never had this before. It's just we were talking about different religions and how it may all come to a head soon. Things there's gonna be a lot of changes coming up. So,
Yeah.
He's very open to it. I was surprised. It was wonderful that he sees that and he's voicing that. So
yeah, and that's part of my work is helping to bring a little compassion, to bring a little light to the situation, and I think I can connect that back to my work with the Ozarks in that. I think a lot of these communities haven't been shown a lot of compassion for a while.
For a long time.
These rural communities, they're so isolated, so insular, so connected to each other that,
tradition.
It perpetuates this sort of cycle of hatred and anger in the community. And so a lot of the people that I talked to, a lot of the informants I had who were from these pretty conservative areas, they were very standoffish at first, but once they realized that I was not only from the Ozarks, but that I was interested and I was kind and I wasn't making fun of them and I wasn't, putting the hillbilly stereotype on it, they were so much more open and willing to talk. And actually, they got as much out of the conversation as I did.
Yes.
In that exchange. And I think that was kind of an eye-opener for me because even growing up in the Ozarks, I had very weird opinions about the rural Ozarks being backwards and all of this other stuff. And that was a really good experience for me to be able to go out and see that, at the end of the day, people are people. And, there's not so many different types of humans. We're basically all the same. And, we might have a lot of odd opinions and beliefs and things like that. But, I kind of realized that, other people are as fiercely protective of their beliefs as I am of mine. And so I can't blame somebody for being protective of their beliefs when I do the same thing. And so being able to open up and kind of have that conversation is something that, I think it's getting better, but it hasn't happened in a lot of areas in a while.
You have to be reserved. You have to be reserved once in a while, just to get the feel for the person before you express who you are and open up to your beliefs.
Absolutely.
It's healthier that way. It's safer. For me, I know.
Oh, yeah.
It's just you just can't say, "Hey, I'm a Ozarker." You just can't say that to every people. You got to kind of
I definitely I definitely have to judge the situations that I'm in. I used to give a lot more sort of in-person lectures and talks and stuff like that, and I even did Ozark herbal preparation courses. So talking about herbal remedies and things like that. And those, I always had to judge the crowd. Like, is it an older crowd? Should I mention magic? Should I mention ghosts? Or should I not? So, yeah, I definitely had to learn, what language to use around certain groups. Because I tend to be a very open person, and that gets me in trouble a lot.
Does me too, believe me. It does me too. I'm very, very vocal, very open to my feelings, in my opinion. Yeah. But sometimes I do use caution, but other times I don't. I just don't care. It just depends on the situation. But,
yeah. Sometimes the message is more important than the caution.
Mm-hmm.
But then sometimes, it's better to think about things.
What? What's that? Mom wanted to know if you can ask for help from your deceased loved ones?
I believe you can. So for me, you know, that spirit world is always present. And I believe that there are certain places where that veil is thinner. There's certain times of the year it's thinner. But I also believe that, you know, our loved ones, our guides, our spirits, they're always with us, and they're not going to necessarily wait for you to be at a certain time of the year to get a message through. If they want to talk to you, they'll get a message through. So I always encourage people, you know, if you want to connect to ancestors, things like that, to maybe incorporate it into weekly practices or monthly practices, things like that. One thing that I do is I have a box that I keep in my workspace, and it has photos, and I do a lot of genealogy work. So I printed out family trees and all of that. And it just has, you know, things that are very special to me. And so I just always keep it around so that, you know, if I need help, I can kind of sit with that and, you know, get some help from those ancestors. But then also, I believe that our ancestors benefit from the work that we do for ourselves as well. So as we work to elevate our own spirits, to grow as people, to grow as, you know, incarnated entities, as we grow and heal, that work can help everyone that has come before us in our family tree, and it can benefit all of those people. So I always get questions from people, you know, like, well, I want to start an ancestor altar or shrine, but my grandpa was a horrible person, and I don't know if I want him hanging around. And that's an important question. I mean, because I have people in my family tree that I don't necessarily want hanging around. So I always tell people that, you know, magic is all based in intention. Magic is based in your connection to your own spirit, and then how that connects to the world around you. And so if you're you know, doing maybe a weekly thing where you place water or food out for your ancestral spirits, or you have an ancestor altar or something like that, and you don't want certain spirits around, then just say that. Just, you know, say, I welcome in all of my ancestors who want to help me grow and help me become a better person. And everyone else, I pray that you get healed, or that you find what you need to find, but not here. And so, yeah, I 100% believe that you can petition your dead relatives' ancestral spirits. In the Ozarks, you know, the healers and practitioners that I've met, the ones that work with ancestor spirits, they make a distinction between there's ancestors of the blood, so blood relatives, things like that, but then there's also ancestors of the work. And so these are ancestors that are doing the same sort of work, or have done the same sort of work that you are doing in your current life. And so for me, those ancestors of the work are other healers, other people who have worked with magic and things like that. But I've known people that have had ancestors who were writers, who helped them write, or helped them, you know, ancestors of the work who were engineers or scientists, things like that. And so it's not just those spirits that from our family that want to help us, but also those spirits from our sort of extended, like, human family, I guess, that might want to come in and help us do better work.
Yeah, Brandon, this has been a pleasure. It's been an honor to talk to you, and man, these 2 hours have gone really, really fast, really, really quickly, and we got so much information out there, and it's a joy to talk to you. I really, really enjoyed this.
Likewise, this was a fun conversation.
Yeah. I have a lot of people tell me I got family and loved ones and spirits around me all the time. Do you?
Yeah. I mean, I feel it for myself. I feel it for a lot of people around me. I think that, from an Ozark perspective, I would say you probably have a gift of some sort.
Strong path.
And I mean, saying that, I always feel like, in a lot of ways in the Ozarks anyway, when people identify somebody as having the gift, a lot of times it's considered a burden. And I know you probably have experienced that, the burden of being in that. So for me, telling somebody, so by saying, I think you have the gift, part of me is like, oh, but you're putting this thing on him. But you already know that. So I think,
Yeah.
But I think
Brandon,
that spirits are
so
always
wonderful. Always around us. Yeah, definitely. Brandon, we're about out of time here. And how could people get a hold of you? How can people get a hold of your wonderful books?
So my book is Ozark Folk Magic, Plants, Prayers, and Healing from Llewellyn. It is pretty much anywhere online, bookshop, Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, all of these other places. It is in some physical stores. You can check the big ones, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, things like that, but it might be in a local New Age shop near you. You can also find me online. I have a website, ozarkhealing.com. Facebook page, Ozark Healing Traditions, and an Instagram, Ozark Healing Traditions. So I do classes and lectures. I've started doing virtual classes, and I put all of those on the website. So if anybody is interested, they can connect in that way.
We'll have to have you back on sometime. Like I said before, this has been wonderful.
Absolutely.
It's taken my mind off a lot. We'll have to stay connected and stay in touch. It's been wonderful.
Absolutely. I'd love that.
All right. Thank you so much, Brandon.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll talk again soon. Thank you. Get the outro to play here. Yeah, have a great night, Brandon. Yeah.